Hi and hello watch fans, and welcome to another edition of The Real Time Show with me, your friendly neighbourhood watchmaker Rob Nuts, and my co-host Alon Ben Joseph. We are back in the studio to answer your questions in another mailbag episode. Alon, how are you feeling today?
I'm doing well. I'm still a bit bunged up, but I'm doing well. I'm excited for a new Q&A episode. I love these episodes. We're getting more and more questions sent in. Actually, a lot of feedback. I've been receiving quite some positive feedback. So thank you guys. Thank you for listening. And thank you for sending in the questions.
It really does mean a lot to us. It's great to see that kind of support, and it's great to see it manifest in really insightful questions that challenge us and really make us think. And we love sharing our opinions with you, and we also like having to do our own research behind the scenes. So without further ado, let's jump to it today. We have a few questions coming in. Where shall we start? Let's go with Gareth, who came in via email, and he said, the Grand Seiko SBGW 295 in titanium and a Rushi Shine launched this week. It's stunning. What do you guys think of Seiko, and what's the difference between it and Grand Seiko? Okay, Alon, why don't you take this one from the top, and I will listen intently.
Thank you, Gareth. I actually don't own a Grand Seiko. I used to own a lot of Seiko watches. I don't anymore. I do have great respect for the brand. We used to retail Seiko on many levels up to Grand Seiko for many years. Grand Seiko wasn't a separate brand up until a few years ago. It was just a collection within Seiko. Only a few years ago, after a lot of pressure from Western countries, they persuaded the Japanese to segment Grand Seiko and branch it off. And today it's a separate brand. There is one layer above Grand Seiko. It's not the pinnacle of what they do at the Seiko factories. There is also Crador, but Crador is solely sold in Japan. So for everyone outside of Japan, Grand Seiko is the top of what they do. Now, what a lot of people get confused with Seiko is they make watches for almost as low as 100, 150 euro, dollars, pounds, automatic movements even, which are made in-house, and they go up to 10, 20,000 in Grand Seiko, and Cradors go up from 20,000 upwards to crazy minute repeaters and tourbillons. And actually, last year we've seen a Grand Seiko tourbillon, which was an amazing piece for 200,000-300,000, I believe. But it's a good thing. I think they split it up. I like almost everything they do at Grand Seiko, besides the font of their logo. I don't know why they use this Gothic style font, but they love that font in Japan. I had the honor to visit the factories, several factories of Casio. And the cool thing is that the Japanese master watchmakers are actually called Meister in the German sense of the word. So Meister. They literally write Meister everywhere. And the grand watchmakers, the master watchmakers, literally have Meister on their dust jackets, their white doctor's jackets, let's say. So that's a fun fact. Now, for the 110th anniversary of Seiko, Grand Seiko launched the SBGW 295. It's a dress watch. Strangely enough, and I think coolly enough, it's a titanium watch with a very, very shiny black dial. They call it Urushi Shine, and gold indexes and hands. I love dress watches. I think it's super cool. It has a hefty price ticket. And that comes because it has a very high-end caliber in there. If I'm not mistaken, it retails around 14,000 US dollars. They released it this month, and it's available, limited to 500 pieces worldwide. The caliber used is the 9S64. So, Rob, you as a watchmaker, could you tell us a bit more? Because it's a hand wound movement. 72 hours power reserve. What I love that the Japanese are very meticulous. They write that the mean daily rate is +5 -3 seconds, but they add normal usage accuracy is +10 -1. So they make a differentiation between these two, which you don't see with the Swiss watchmakers.
Yeah, I love Grand Seiko. I find it funny that you pointed out the use of the font. I guess I never really said it out loud, but I also find it a very strange choice. I've grown to love it over the years, though, I have to say, and I no longer see it as a drawback. I once did, once upon a time. I think it was 2017 when Seiko and Grand Seiko officially split, and Grand Seiko pushed for an international expansion, which hadn't really been its primary goal ever since it first emerged as a sub-collection to the Seiko brand. Now, I think Crador is, like you say, generally only available in Japan, but I'm sure that I've seen one in person in the Place Vendôme Grand Seiko boutique in Paris. So maybe you can get the odd piece here and there directly in Grand Seiko boutiques, but I'm not sure if that piece was actually for sale or if they were just showing it to us to show off what Crador can do. I don't like Crador at all. I find it pretty tasteless in most cases, which is ironic because Grand Seiko for me is one of the classiest brands and one of the most tasteful. There are some odd little things that I could really do without, and one of them you see when you turn this watch over in hand and study the manual movement. It's partially obscured by a ghosted out lion logo in the middle of the crystal, which is printed on the underside of the crystal. This is Grand Seiko's little mascot, as it were, and I always think it's totally unnecessary on the case back and a bit of an odd thing to do. It seems strangely un-Japanese, given how beautiful and refined everything else that the brand does is. Now, to this model in particular, yeah, it's a classy piece, no word of a lie. It is timeless, it is elegant, it's a black dial, and it's gold indices and gold hands in a hard titanium case with Zaratsu or Salaz polishing. Funnily enough, Salaz polishing machines come from Germany. So it's interesting that the Japanese watchmakers used Meister as their honorific when it comes to anointing the top end watchmakers. Perhaps there's more of a connection between Japanese and German watchmaking than the obvious things like precision and clean lines and so on and so forth that we talk about frequently. So, additionally to the Urushi dial, which is a special kind of lacquer famed in Japan, there are 24 karat gold hour markers set into that dial using maki-e, which is a technique of basically powder application to lacquer while it's still in state. To that movement, Alon draws our attention to the caliber 9S64. It's in-house, hand-wound, 24 joules, 28,800 VPH. Regulation, as he says, mean daily rate of +5 to -3 seconds per day and 72-hour power reserve. Is it the best thing Grand Seiko does? No. By my estimation, the most interesting thing Grand Seiko does is and always will be the spring drive, which is an excellent hybrid timekeeping system that no other brand can match, and it has the only true sweep seconds hand in the industry, even though other people like to mention high-stepping watches as a corollary of the spring drive. There is nothing quite like it. The spring drive second hand does not step, it just actually sweeps around the dial. Here, of course, we have a traditional step, 28,800 VPH, otherwise known as 4 Hertz, which means 8 ticks per second. That's fine, totally standard, normal. In fact, 72-hour power reserve for a movement this slim is pretty impressive, actually. Does it blow me away? No, it doesn't blow me away. The retail price, like Alon says, is around 14,000 USD, specifically 14,700 euros, 500 pieces worldwide, and available from February 2023. So for those of you listening to this show, it's already out. Do I love it? I don't love it. I respect it. That is as far as I'll go with my praise for this particular model. But I echo what you said. I'm glad that Grand Seiko and Seiko are now separate entities because that helps with understanding both brands and what they're on planet Earth to do.
So, devil's advocate question for you, Rob. Spending this money on a dress watch, a time-only watch, let's say.
Okay.
That amount, not precious metal, I guess I would shout out Jaeger LeCoultre Master. Maybe second-hand Patek Calatrava. which you could even think of precious metal. But if we stick to new, Vacheron Constantin, what would you put as a benchmark next to this um, rather steep priced Grand Seiko dress watch?
Well, for me, it has to be Lange & Söhne Saxonia Thin. I would love one of those. And okay, they are a little bit more expensive. I guess they're around 19 and a half for a standard rose gold or white gold model. And yes, that's precious metals, of course, so that's totally fine. But if we're talking five figures, over 10, below 20, then the Saxonia Thin is the model to beat for me. That's pure class. I don't know of a better watch.
So would you say this is just too steep in price?
Um, okay, I guess this is going to sound a bit damning and a little bit harsh, but I wouldn't be tempted to buy this watch at 5K. I think that maybe for me, the style just doesn't resonate enough. Aesthetically, it's beautiful, it's really nice, but I'd rather have a black dial Glacéteur Original 1960s edition, for example, for much less money to evoke that same kind of period. The Irushi and the Maki is a wonderful artisanal handcraft, but it doesn't do enough to sell the watch to me. I'm just not that taken by it. Is it lovely? Do I respect it? Yeah, like I said before, I totally do. But when I turn it over, that manual wine caliber, it's no more impressive to me than a Nomos Alpha caliber, which you can have in a Tetra or a Tangenta for €1,500. And certainly, in a way, have a fair bit more character about the watch to boot. So I reference the Saxonia Thin because I think when you're spending that kind of money, when you're spending between 10 and 20K, you've got to get good watchmaking. You've got to get a proper movement in there, something that you will delight at looking at, something that really can go down the generations, never get old, never be anything other than wowing the first time you turn it over in your hands. And for me, Langer's movements always hit that mark. So I would put it in that conversation as the best watch under 20K for a dress watch, simply because it is the most affordable Lange and therefore the most impressive watch at that price point to me. If you want that kind of thing, if you're after that. I mean, if you're asking me what I'd spend the same amount of money on, we know the answer is actually a Glacéteur Original Panamatic chronograph, 1970s in Vibing Orange, because that's what I bought most recently at roughly the same price point. And that, to me, is worthwhile. So, yeah, there you go. That's my feeling. It's a bit harsh. It sounds a bit harsh. I wouldn't buy it at 5, but, I'm just not interested in it. It's not good.
I didn't find it that harsh. I think you were coming near harsh on the article analysis there. David was shocked by you, but I'm used to you. And this is called the Real Time Show, right? Real talks about real watches. So we can say whatever we feel and like on this show. And you can ask us anything and say anything to us that you feel, guys, who are listening. Thank you so much for that question. Let's go to our one of our favorite mailbag senders, Da Dutch Collection on Instagram.
Oh no, he's back.
He's back, and it's a half a statement, comment, essay, and half of the time I don't even know what the exact question is. But let's try. He wrote on Instagram, how brand positioning and their underlying message transforms middle age, apparently normal, buyers into an obsessive, compulsive watch addicts.
Okay,
Rob, did you get it, or should we summarize it?
I got it. I just find it funny because it's like he's talking about himself as well, I guess, but he's also talking about us so clearly. I think apparently normal is what made me laugh the most. The middle age part, not so much, but apparently normal. Yeah, I guess there's maybe something in all of us that is not quite normal from the get-go, and that's maybe why we fall down this rabbit hole so deeply, and most of us that are in it are still falling with no sign of the bottom at all. I would say brands know what they're doing. There is a certain like midlife crisis bent to most of their marketing. it's all fast cars, motorbikes, beautiful women, or like quite esteemed and respected guys. Men react well to, I think, you can tell who the target demographic of a brand is by their ambassadors, right? So think about the fact that rather than having young, pretty, style-led men in positions of influence in the watch industry, it tends to be the more well-traveled, experienced, seasoned gentlemen. Like George Clooney's a perfect example. Maybe David Beckham, he's an esteemed figure in his field. He's done it. He's retired. He's out there. You can use examples of like active athletes, like when Tag Heuer was with Ronaldo and Lewis Hamilton, and when they had like younger people like Cara Delevingne or Leo in his early years as ambassadors. That speaks volumes about who they're talking to. But for the most part, Autorologie is targeting middle-aged guys, mostly European or North American males, who look to those more established and esteemed figures, and also like to see them living a slightly devil-may-care lifestyle that I'm sure that they would choose to live themselves if they could, or felt they could, or at least do so vicariously through these ambassadors. So I think the watch media knows what it's doing. I think that you could argue, as Dutch is insinuating, that it's somewhat irresponsible to prey upon our vulnerability and turn us into obsessive compulsive watch addicts. But I mean, look, there are worse things that a man can be addicted to. And certainly at that point in his life, we see men do lots of crazy stuff, either become quite risk-taking in either their physical pursuits or their romantic endeavors, and somewhat more capricious in their spending habits. And, a watch for 4, 5, even 10, 15,000 may seem like a lot of money, but if you find yourself taken by the sports car bug instead, I think you'd be shelling out a lot more, a lot quicker, and perhaps with less satisfaction at the end of it all. So I don't know. What do you think? What do you think of his postulation today?
So you mentioned celebrity endorsement. I guess the newest thing that brands deploy to convince and trick us and to get us addicted, I think, is that the sense of FOMO, the fear of missing out. And I say that because we went into a phase, especially just before COVID and during COVID, that everything ballooned and it was filled with hot air and the sky seemed the limit. And if you don't act fast enough, then you'll miss out with limited editions, collabs, and even almost every brand has a waiting list on regular models. So that seemed like a tactic. I'm not insinuating, I'm not pointing a finger, but I guess we all know it's happening and we're all joining that rat race. And now that we live in a kind of post-COVID era, although there's a lot going on in the world, social and politically and demographically and even geographically with earthquakes, unfortunately, that's sad news occurred, or that event occurred a few weeks ago. It is strange that a lot of brands seem oblivious to these facts.
You raise an interesting point here, and I think it actually ties in quite nicely with what Dutch is shining a light upon. It's true that a lot of watch lovers do tend to be men in midlife, and we know that period of time for a man is very frequently dominated by a crisis or crises of whatever mortality most of the time, and we cling to things. Do you think that? I never looked at it this way before. We always talk about the pandemic and the effect that it had on people as a more practical thing, like, the time they have to sort of spend on websites researching watches and looking at all this stuff, and the excess money that they had because they weren't traveling or they weren't going anywhere, and they could, put a bit more aside for watches. But do you think that it also had like a psychological impact on us in terms of the fact we became a little bit more aware of our fragility and our mortality? Everybody did, even younger people. And they said, hey, you know what? What am I waiting for? I want that watch. I want to treat myself. I want to live. Like, the world is pretty depressing right now. Lots of people were dying in the early days before the vaccine and before we got it under control with all of the other measures that societies took around the world. But do you think that played a part in a way? Like, everybody went through a bit of an existential crisis at the same time. And it's these existential crises that brands tend to leverage, I'm sure quite wittingly, when it comes to the demographic Dutch is describing. What do you think about that?
I agree with you. I do think that another credo after FOMO, we use YOLO, you live only once. I think you're right. Yes. I guess that watches are a luxury product. I don't guess. It is. They are a luxury product. Nobody needs them. It is a luxury. It's one of the few jewels a man actually wears. They can wear more, but it's one of the few that men actually wear. And it's not high in the pecking order. And I guess the biggest task brands have is not so much to speak to solely those geeks that all of us are here on the show and you that are listening, because congratulations, if you're listening to the show, you're officially a watch nerd. So they're not so much speaking to us. And for them, the biggest pond is those fish that don't own a luxury watch, or maybe just one, and they have to convert the non-believers to believers, right? So that's a different ball game, marketing wise and communication wise, and I guess the brand that made the biggest pivot in their marketing is IWC from Schaffhausen. They spoke solely to men and watch geeks, very technical, high sense of humor. It was all about products, not celebrities. And they moved to a lifestyle brand. And today it seems it's just about that. And it's not that relevant anymore what even goes into the watches caliber wise, for example. And it works. I mean, I'm not criticizing them. I'm just stating what I think is their uh, evolution. It's almost a revolution, and they're growing and they're still growing. So obviously it works. So it's actually interesting to see.
He's done it again, hasn't he? He's kind of raised an interesting topic out of nowhere. He's always good value, Dutch. Thanks again, mate, for your questions and being part of the show. And I saw you pop up on my Instagram the other day as well, offering us a shout out because you know you've become an integral part of the Real Time Show, as all our listeners are. So please, if you want to get in touch like Dutch has done on frequent occasion, then please do. You can contact us on Instagram either at Rob Nuds, ROBNUDDS, or Alon Ben Joseph, that's ALONBENJOSEPH. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe and follow, leave us a 5-star review. That's nice. It sounds like a small thing, but it really does help when it comes to the growth of the podcast, and it helps us move forward to bigger and better things. Now, talking of questions, bigger and better questions. This is a grand one from your mate, Edward, in Amsterdam. He says, what is your vision for a watch brand such as Bremont? Are they going to survive the future? So, quite a interesting question, one of survival or otherwise. You take this one away, Alon. You know Bremont very well.
So do you, but since I know Edward and he sent this by email to me, thank you, Edward, again for your lovely questions. And it's actually you finish it off with a statement, quite a bold statement, because if I dissect that statement, are they going to survive the future? Well, it seems that you doubt the fact if they would, and I understand why, because they are relatively young. They are not that known outside the Commonwealth countries, so Great Britain, Australia, Hong Kong, and the US. And at Ace Jewelers, we have been retailing them exclusively for quite some time. And it's more because we are huge fans of the English brothers, Giles and Nick English, and all of their teams. But if I take that answer objectively, the answer is yes. And that news, why I can say wholeheartedly yes, is they got funded out of the blue by billionaire Bill Ekman, and he funded or invested in Bremont because he was such a fan. He visited London, saw their boutique, bought a few watches for himself and as gifts, and then reached out to the English brothers and said, "Hey guys, could I get on board?" That automatically financially secured, I guess, the short midterm future. Not only that funds my answer, but also the fact that at the end of 2022, they went full steam ahead by fulfilling their dream to become a real watch manufacturer, meaning not only make their spare parts and components on the outside, cases, etc., but also their movements. They created a base caliber, the ENG 300, and with that, they call that a tractor, and you can modularly put complications on top of that, and therefore create different types of calibers, functionalities, and therefore designs of watches. And they launched with that caliber 3 different new models, including an amazing watch with an integrated bracelet. So they get on that bandwagon. So they're diversifying their brand identity and therefore their collections, because they're known as a pilot's brand, which is an authentic story because both English brothers are pilots. Their dad was a pilot, unfortunately was because he crashed actually in an airplane crash near or in a farm called Bremont, and that's why the brand is called Bremont. It's a French name, but it's a fully English company. So they're going to survive. What's our vision for the watch brand, such as Bremont? So to dissect that question, Bremont, I think, has a glorious future. I think they passed all the difficult hurdles, and they have a right of existence because they have actually, in many countries, quite a big following. Not all the countries, they're not a global brand yet, but they are the flag holders for making British watchmaking great again. And obviously, Rob is a huge fan of British watchmaking because he is a British watchmaker and he comes from there and he's schooled there and he has a lot of friends there. So therefore, we have had the honor to welcome many British watchmakers on the show already, and we have quite a few in the pipeline. So that's very exciting. And me, myself, since I have an English wife, I'm a great fan of not only English women, but also England and English watchmaking. And for those that are not that familiar with the history of watchmaking, just think of GMT. So time, the standard of time, was created actually in the UK. People say Greenwich, but it's Greenwich Mean Time, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So potato, but it's Greenwich Mean Time. So that indicates already how important England was in watchmaking.
I think when it comes to Greenwich, it's more potato patutu. There's only one way of pronouncing it. So yeah, let's just go with potato.
I'm gonna tell my kids that patutu. My friend Rob eats tonight patutu. Sorry, guys. Sorry, that's inside joke. Sorry. So we're deviating. So it died off. I guess the grand master of modern British watchmaking was George Daniels. His protege, Smith, on the Isle of Man, is the high priest of English horology. And Bremont is high end, but they are doing the volume game. Call them the equivalent of Swiss Breitling. I wouldn't say Omega, but Breitling, let's say.
You know what I always say? I always say they're the British Rolex. And what I mean by that is they tell the best story. They are an exceptional marketing company. And I mean that complimentarily. Is that a word? sounded very long. I mean that in a nice way. I really do. Like it's an incredible skill. I had this conversation recently with a guest and also privately with another watchmaking friend. How important is marketing and communication versus the product itself? And we agreed that excellent communication can be enough for you to survive for so long. It can make up for a product's ills in the first instance, but ultimately, the product is what wins the day. The product is what gets you the second sale. Your marketing, your branding, that might get you your first. The product becomes your ambassador and will either get you the second or not. Hopefully, the second, third, fourth, and fifth. And that's something Bremont has had to catch up with a little bit because their story has been better than their watches for quite a long time. That's my opinion as a former watchmaker for Bremont, for someone that knows what goes into the making of the watches, and for someone that really wants to make a clear statement of just how impressed I am and how grateful I am to Bremont for having made that leap into movement manufacture, as they always promised, as they always aspired to, as they have endeavored to from the very first moment, to now have the ANG 300 base caliber and this ability to add modules to it to diversify its complication offering is a wonderful thing for British watchmaking. It is an excellent foundation for the future of the brand, and the funding that they receive from this billionaire is a really, really timely injection of capital, which hopefully will buoy the brand over its next phase of development and see it soar to hitherto unreached heights. I am really confident and really hopeful that Bremont now is going to become the game changer from a watchmaking perspective that it always had the potential to be. And I think the boys, Giles and Nick, my former bosses, have navigated this early phase of brand development expertly. It hasn't always been easy. There have been mistakes. We all know about the proprietary in-house mix-up that caused ripples throughout the industry. And if anyone doesn't know about it, just to fill you in, what happened is that they accidentally referred to a proprietary caliber, which is a caliber that is made exclusively for a brand by a third-party movement manufacturing specialist, as in-house, which implies that the watch was made by Bremont itself for Bremont, and that wasn't true. It was an honest mistake, but it was something that caught fire a little bit and torched the reputation for a short period of time, but they rebuilt it. They stayed the course. They have improved their product offering. And now, with the ENG 300 in their arsenal, they have the opportunity to go to the next level. A level many doubted they would ever reach. A level few also speculated they didn't really want to reach. But thankfully, the boys were telling the truth. That was the goal. And now we're there. And more power to Bremont and all who sail in her.
Well said, Rob. So to finish off Edward's question, what's our vision for watch brands such as Bremont? So we can either say, hey, these underdog brands, because they were a bit underdogish, they're moving slowly to mainstream. And we could speak with just about English. I think for both, a very positive future. I guess that the watchmaking world has grown up due to amazing bloggers. There's a lot of communication and education out there. I mean, that's why we exist, the Real Time Show. We're here to share the passion of watchmaking and to share knowledge. And that's what you and I, Rob, and I set out to do. We've been running now for 3 months about, and I guess our hypothesis has been confirmed. There is a need for what we're doing right now because we are getting more and more collectors excited. We're getting new people into the hobby of watchmaking, and we're actually raising the level of knowledge about everything watchmaking. So that makes me happy, and I'm having fun while doing this. So with that comes more appreciation and passion for the lesser known brands. And I think we live in a time where, especially millennials and Gen Z, they want personalization. They don't want mass market. They don't want to wear a 12 in a dozen product, not fashion, not tools, not garments. And I think that's the biggest problem with an Apple Watch or whatever. They're a victim of their own success. Everybody's wearing the same. It seems like a communist state if you go somewhere. So I guess there's a bright future for smaller brands. I don't want to say per definition micro brands, but everything that's not hardcore mainstream. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that the landscape has suddenly shifted in a way that we didn't really predict at the start of the pandemic. So we've already touched upon the pandemic and some of its less often discussed effects on society and the mentality of consumers. One thing that was interesting about that period of time was the explosion of secondary market prices for prestige brands like Rolex. Let's just use Rolex as the base example here, okay? So when the pandemic kicked off, there was a sudden rush, a maniacal rush almost, to buy Rolex pieces, and that drove the prices up to levels we'd never seen before. Twice retail, for example, for something as basic as a Submariner. And they're still lingering around there, but they have dropped. Now, the interesting thing about the Rolex prices dropping back to, I would say, a more realistic, if still somewhat eye-watering level, is that rather than all of the money that would have gone to, let's say, a Rolex Submariner at 20,000, now going on Rolex Submariners at 15 or 16,000, might actually be more likely to be spent elsewhere, because nobody likes to buy a crashing stock, right? The idea is to get something at the bottom and sell at the top. Now, we've seen Rolex hit a top. We've seen these prestige brands hit this new ceiling throughout the pandemic. We saw people clamor to buy those watches because the prevailing wisdom was you can't go wrong. Oh, you buy a date just for, 5,000 over retail, you can sell it for 10,000 over retail the next day. Oh, you can get your hands on an OP36 at retail, you can sell it for 7 times that the next day. There's no reason to worry. Rolex prices, and we heard this a million times, they're only going in one direction. Now, we know that's not true. We saw it with some Patek Philippe Nautiluses, for example, or Nautili. I always find it amusing. I don't really know how to pluralize that one. Patek Philippe Nautilus watches, let's say, at one point, in fact, Guillaume Lede of Nevada Grenchen, Volcane, Excelsior Park, and so on, he referenced exactly this in our interview. That was episode 30. That was episode 30. If you've not listened to it, go back and check it out. Guillaume said quite clearly that a friend of his, a well-off friend, sold their Nautilus for around 250, 260,000 euros, I think it was. And then a month later, the market price, the realistic price of buying one of those on the secondary market had dropped to about 180, 160,000. So the guy that bought it at that price has effectively lost 100,000 euros. That's the worst thing that can happen when you buy at the top and then you want to sell when it goes back down again. So right now, people are stepping back from Rolex a little bit. I was looking myself the other day to buy a Datejust. I've wanted a Datejust for ages. I don't have one, never had one. Been looking for a birth year one from 1985. So I was looking on Chrono24, and I was thinking, you know what? The price of these bicolored Datejusts has kind of stabilized now. It's sort of sticking around 5,000. You can even see some of them nicking under 5,000 for the first time in a little bit. And you know what it did? It actually discouraged me from buying them right now, because I thought, well, you know what I'd rather do? I'd rather buy the day after that price starts to go up again. So I feel like I've bought near the bottom. And so I'm waiting. I'm sort of thinking, I'll let it slide. Maybe it won't go down much further. Maybe it won't go up much further. Maybe that's just a realistic secondary market price. But now, because of this massive bubble that was created during the pandemic for watches that seemed like safe money, now that's burst, and Rolexes have dropped back down again. Like I say, still a premium over retail, but now a little bit more palatable. I personally wouldn't be putting my money into a Rolex tomorrow. Would I buy one at retail? Yeah, of course I buy one at retail, but I wouldn't be buying one on the pre-love market. So that means money that I would have there for a watch that I perhaps want could be funneled towards something else. Smaller brands, like a Bremont with an ENG 300. Now that suddenly becomes a watch that I need in my collection. It has to feature in my collection at some point, because it is something different. It is something special. It is something uniquely Bremont. Something quintessentially English now has 10 times more value to me than the watches previously. And I like the watches previously aesthetically, of course. They're really cool. But with that movement, they become very special. Whenever a brand has something about it that other brands don't have, it has value. Anordain with its dials, Schofield with its identifiable design, Shapiro with his engine-turned dials, something that other people can't do as well as that brand. It has value. So now the ENG 300, that is a value add because it's special. If you want one of those, you've got to buy a Bremont. That was the dream for the company. That's going to be great for that company going forward. And other brands will benefit from this same phenomenon, that maybe good money that was thrown after bad Rolexes is now available for them instead. So long may it continue. Shout out to Garrick, another British watch company that does amazing work with the dials and the movements. Shout out to Struthers, London, Rebecca and Craig, working out of their workshop in Birmingham. Another great brand that does things that no one else can do. These are the kind of brands that will benefit now as we come out of the pandemic, and long may that continue.
Amen. Thank you. Next question. Ulrika sent an email. She said, or asked, what do you think of the new Watches AP launch recently? And I'm actually very curious, Rob, what do you think? And which one was your favorite? Because I immediately and quickly had one.
You know, that's a damn good question, but you're going to have to give me a few minutes to think about this because I can't decide. I know you know. You just said you know. So you tell the audience what you want. Let me cogitate a little while. I need to consider, because, oh my God, what a deluge of releases that was. It was too many. But, who loves, I love watches, so whatever.
There were literally too many. And they came out of the blue. They scattered them around in a week time. It was a diffused flow of content and message and storytelling. And there's so many to share. The ones that popped in my mind, hands down, my favorite were the Code 1159s, the basic three-handers, stainless steel. First time ever they're making the Code 1159 steel. And I wanted to have it on the record. I never hated on them. I always loved them. Were they mind-blowing? No. Should have had a octagonal ring in the middle of the case to wink at the Royal Oak? Maybe not. Is it a lovely watch? Yeah, it is. And I'm happy they are staying the course, line extensions, and I find it a pity that Audemars Piguet, which is an amazing brand, became a one-trick pony. It's just Royal Oak, Royal Oak, Royal Oak, Royal Oak. A few years ago, they launched the Code 1159. I would have liked to see something crazy. I mean, we know they have Renault Papy, which today officially is Audemars Piguet. We know they had a big finger in Richard Mille. We know they can make crazy concept watches. I want to see more. But okay, so that was my favorite. Then 37 millimeters, full yellow gold Royal Oak with a real lapis lazuli dial. Okay, we talked a lot about Tiffany blue. We talked about blues. It's an easy one. It's a simple one. They're not the first to use real stone dials. I guess they're a bit late to the party even, but what can I do? It's a sexy watch. It can go for men. It can go for ladies. Really gender fluid. I never liked the offshores. I never think they should have made the offshores. I'm going to say it, sorry, they raped the Genta design, but 30 years ago, they made the offshore Royal Oaks. A few years later, they made a full black one. They corrected, in brackets, their mistakes. They made this year a full ceramic one, which is cool if you like offshores. Then they made crazy, pimped out, I don't even know what they're called, hyper Royal Oaks that I don't like. They made a Code 1159. I think it's called Conceptuel, which is a hardcore horlogerie, grand complication watch with a sonnerie. Amazing technically, design-wise, I don't like it. I think the beauty of the Code 1159 is the play of lines, the way you have round, the 3D case, and if you look from every angle, it looks different. The dial is beautiful. They added a fumé-styled dial, so it's a gradient-colored dial. Amazing perpetual calendar they brought back in titanium. I love titanium. I love ultra slim. I think the Royal Oak should be thin, not thick. Therefore, I don't like the offshores and all these crazy thick ass Royal Oaks. And that's it for now. Rob, are you Did you collect your thoughts and made a top 3 for yourself?
Yeah, I've got a top three. It may not be that exciting for anybody, but if I were to get any of these on my wrist, it'd be quite exciting for me, that's for sure. So, in third place, hum. Sort of tie between two. I'm going to go with the regular pale blue dial Royal Oak, the automatic, with the slight fume. They call it a fume. It's sort of like from navy to sky blue dial design. That would be my third spot. That's a nice, very solid addition to the collection. A beautiful color. Not the most exciting pick, I admit. But that would be number three. Number two is the weirdest pick for me, and that does come from the code 1159 collection. A collection I also quite liked in principle from the early days, but always felt they'd not quite got the dials right. I thought the case was really interesting. I thought a lot of the dials looked quite lost. I loved the Wandering Hours release we saw in December, but we're not really including that one here. We were talking about the more recent releases from the end of January. I went for the Flying Tourbillon with the smoked green aventurine dial because, despite not being a huge fan of tourbillons, I am a huge fan of aventurine, and I'd never seen smoked green aventurine. I guess this is like made in a lab, so like aventurine glass rather than aventurine the mineral, two different things. It describes itself as smoked green enameled aventurine, so it's sort of, I guess, synthetic, but playing on the natural appearance of aventurine, and it's really cool. Would I buy it myself? No, I wouldn't. It's way too pricey and just a bit too in your face for me, but I respect it and I like it and it's interesting and it's new, and so that takes the number two spot for me. My number one, though, is a watch I would absolutely love to own. The Royal Oak is a model that I covet. It's not at the top of my list, but I do love bicolor quartz pieces from the 90s, particularly. That's my fetish. Like tantalum and rose gold Audemars Piguet Royal Oaks with quartz movements. I think they're absolutely awesome, and I have got my eye on a few on Chrono 24. I haven't pulled the trigger yet, but I am seriously considering it. What I like more than anything in the modern collection is this frosted finish that you sometimes get. I think it's called a Florentine finish. Is that right? Does that sound right, Elon?
It does. And that was also a question I had. You said you were Googling. I was wondering if you ever owned a Royal Oak and if it made your wish list, but you answered my question.
No, I've never had one. But yeah, those quartz models do make my wish list. But this one, this new chronograph with the pale blue fume dial, goes to navy at the edges, and the nice ice blue subdials. It's got this Florentine frosting, which is applied by hand with a diamond-tipped tool hammered into the surface of the white gold in this case, and it's all over the bezel and the bracelet, and the chamfers are slightly widened to accentuate the polish applied to them. It is like nothing else. I think sometimes people see this as a bit of a feminine finish, but I love it. I think it works both ways very easily. I know Tiny Temper was seen rocking a rose gold version of it, and it looked great on his wrist, so I don't see why any man or anyone at all wouldn't feel comfortable wearing this. It's just a beautiful artisanal effect and absolutely my favorite release. It's got a retail of 89,100 euros. Good luck getting one at that price. 41 millimeters wide, 12.4 millimeters thick, and 50 meters water resistant. It's an absolute game changer for the brand, in my opinion.
I agree. I'm with you. And good picks. Awesome picks, Rob. Well done. Now, a question for you as a watchmaker. We touched upon the topic of the Super Speedmaster. Michael sent a question on Instagram. Can Omega really guarantee the precision of 0 to +2 seconds with the new caliber 8890 with the Spirit system that they launched a few weeks ago? I think you mentioned a bit, but let's talk about it again because it's very ambitious.
Yeah, it is and it isn't. I mean, it's like we know that you can guarantee certain timekeeping parameters depending on the regulating organ that you choose to use. For example, quartz. You can say, oh, this quartz watch will keep time within 10 seconds per month, for example. Sounds crazy, sounds impossible, but yeah, it can do it because the material is that regular and oscillator. So fine, why wouldn't it work? It operates well within a wide range of realistic temperatures to which a watch might be subjected. So yeah, why wouldn't it work? Same with a spy rate system. We did touch upon the slight drawback sometimes of silicon components in that they shatter under impact, under extreme impact, but most of the time that's direct impact. And these components are supported by a shock absorption system, as you would find in all modern regulating organs in watches, in balance wheels and balance staffs protected either side by Incablock springs and cap jewels. So there's no real reason why it shouldn't be able to keep the time exactly as they state. It's not a component that requires interference on a human level very much at all. You put it in there, you tweak the spy rate regulator system, and that's it. It's done. It's good to go. The spring doesn't deform under temperature. It doesn't bend. It isn't bendable. So yeah, why not? I believe it. Totally.
You just touched upon the topic of temperature, right? Because normally, if it's not a silicon hairspring, temperature already has a relatively big effect. I mean, it's relative, but that automatically gives you 1-2 seconds deviation, right, per day?
Potentially.
Yeah.
But it depends on the material.
So, yeah, if I'm talking about the old styled hairsprings that are a special steelish alloy, let's say, but you're saying so on silicone, temperature doesn't have the effect, and therefore they can push the boundaries from I believe it was -2 +4 on the master coaxial, the master chronometer. They pushed it to 0 and +2.
I think it's totally doable.
Okay,
I really do.
amazing.
I mean, it's basically a static component. Like, I know it's moving and it's breathing, but like it isn't susceptible to environmental changes like the materials it's replacing. So it's the question really is not, do we believe their timekeeping claims? It's, do we want our mechanical watches to be that accurate if it means that the components being used within them are no longer as mechanically derived as they once were? There is a charm to a human manipulated hairspring that something like a spy rate system can't replicate, right?
Interesting philosophical question, which I need to ponder about, but I think my answer is going to be I agree with you. I want to leave it at this. I want our listeners maybe to think about it, send us their opinions, feedbacks, 2 cents, or say that we're utter idiots. Rob, thank you. Another fun episode.
Yeah, thanks, mate. It was a good one. Again, lots of passion, lots of interesting speculations and assessments of times recently past, which I don't think we looked at in quite the same way as we did before today, and will now assess slightly differently going forward. If you'd like to be part of the show in the future, then get in touch with even Alon or me via Instagram. That is at RobNuds, ROBNUDDS, or at Alon Ben Joseph, ALONBENJOSEPH. Alternatively, you can contact us via email, either rob@therealtime.show or alon@therealtime.show. We will be back on Thursday with another interview with another one of watchmaking superstars. Do not miss it. We will see you then. Stay safe and keep on ticking.